The backstage corridor at the Los Angeles Forum smelled like hairspray, cold coffee, and something harder to name. The particular tension that only exists when two forces of nature are about to occupy the same space. It was the spring of 1988, and the room at the end of that hallway held two women who, by every reasonable measure of the music industry, should never have been placed in the same dressing room wing. One had survived an abusive marriage, poverty, and 20 years of being told she was nothing without a man's last name. The other had been handed the world at 22 and was still figuring out whether she actually wanted it. What happened between Whitney Houston and Tina Turner that night has never been fully told. Until now. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on your chest, stay with this story, because what these two women said to each other in that corridor changed both of them forever. And if you want more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button right now. Whitney Houston arrived at 4:47 p.m. She was 24 years old, and by every metric the industry had invented, she was already a phenomenon. Her debut album had sold over 22 million copies. Clive Davis had shaped her image with the precision of a sculptor. Every note polished, every appearance controlled, every interview navigated with the grace of someone trained, from age 11, to be exactly what the world needed her to be. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a black dress, her smile already in place like armor. Her assistant Joelle noticed Whitney hadn't eaten since that morning. She also noticed that Whitney's hands, usually still as stone before a performance, were trembling very slightly as she signed the check-in sheet. The reason for that trembling had a name. 4 letters hung on a dressing room door 40 feet down the hall. Tina. Tina Turner was 48 years old in 1988, and she had done something almost no one in popular music had ever managed. She had come back, not from a bad album or a failed tour. She had come back from erasure, from a marriage to Ike Turner that had left her with nothing but debt, bruises, and a voice so powerful that even he had never been able to break it. Her comeback had been the kind of resurrection people call a miracle. By 1988, she was not just back. She was a force field. She walked into rooms and the air pressure changed. The event that brought them together was a charity concert, one of those industry productions where the biggest names gathered under bright lights to raise money and look like they were doing it. The producer had thought it was genius. Whitney and Tina on the same bill. 2 generations. 2 visions of black womanhood in American music. 2 voices that could level buildings. What he hadn't accounted for was the conversation that happened at 5:15 p.m. in that backstage corridor. Whitney had planned to stay in her own dressing room. A scheduling mix-up changed that. She was almost past Tina's door when it opened. Tina was in full stage mode. Sequined dress, legs that had become as famous as her voice, hair electric and enormous. She glanced up when Whitney passed, then looked again. Not the way fans looked, not the way journalists looked, searching for a story. Tina looked at Whitney the way a woman looks at another woman when she's trying to figure out what's underneath. Whitney stopped walking. You did not keep walking when Tina Turner looked at you. You're Houston, Tina said. Not a question, a confirmation. Yes, ma'am, Whitney said. It came out naturally, the way it does when someone has genuinely earned the word. Tina studied her for a moment. Then she said something no one had dared to say to Whitney Houston in approximately 3 years. Not since the machine around her had grown powerful enough to keep uncomfortable truths at bay. You sing pretty, baby, Tina said, her voice carrying that low, textured rasp that lived beneath the surface of everything she did. But pretty ain't enough. The clipboard holder looked at the floor. Joelle stepped quietly backward. Whitney did not move. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not anger exactly. Something older. Something that had been building for a long time and had never quite found a door. Excuse me? Whitney said. Tina set her tea down and crossed her arms. She looked at Whitney with an expression that was not unkind. Something closer to recognition. The way you look at a younger version of yourself before you learn the things that cost you everything to learn. I've heard your records, Tina said. That voice is a gift from God. And I mean that literally. But I've watched you on stage. Everything is perfect. Everything is right where it's supposed to be. And when everything is always right where it's supposed to be, baby, that's not a performance. That's a photograph, she paused. People don't cry at photographs. Whitney's jaw tightened. I've sold 22 million albums. Mm-hmm. Tina nodded slowly. And I've stood in an arena where 60,000 people were screaming so loud the floor shook, and I knew, in my bones, that I had put something inside them they were going to carry home, that they were going to think about when something hard happened 3 years from now. She held Whitney's gaze. You want to tell me those are the same thing? The corridor was very quiet. A bass note from the sound check echoed through the concrete walls. In that 40-foot stretch of hallway, the sound had gone out of the world. And here is what nobody knew, what Clive Davis didn't know, what the 22 million record buyers didn't know. Whitney Houston had been asking herself that same question for 2 years. In the 3 a.m. moments that come without permission, alone in yet another hotel room, she had been asking, why does it feel like I'm always standing behind glass? Why does it feel like I'm giving everything I have and still holding the most important thing back? The machine around her wasn't built for that conversation. How do you do it? Whitney finally asked, her voice quieter than it had been. How do you make them feel it? Something in Tina's face softened. You stop protecting yourself, Tina said simply. Every night I walk out there, I decide that whatever happens, whatever it costs me, I'm not going to hide, not even a little bit. People can feel when you're hiding. They sense the glass. She stepped slightly closer. You've got a voice that could break people open, crack them right down the middle in the best possible way. But you can't crack anybody open if you won't let them see your cracks first. Whitney looked at her hands, those trembling hands. What are you afraid of? Tina asked. Not to expose, because the answer matters. Whitney was quiet for so long that Joelle thought the conversation was over. Then, I'm afraid that if I crack, I won't be able to stop. Tina Turner nodded. The way you nod when you spoke in that same sentence yourself, in the dark, in your own worst hours. That's the whole thing, baby, she said softly. The cracking doesn't stop you. The cracking is the performance. The cracking is what turns a song into a prayer. She paused. You've been holding that voice like it might shatter, but it won't. I know what it looks like when something survives everything it wasn't supposed to survive. That voice of yours will not break. You need to trust that. Then Tina picked up her tea and turned back toward her dressing room. Go eat something before you go on, she said without looking back. And when you stand at that microphone tonight, stop singing for them. Sing for yourself. Just once. See what happens. The door closed. Whitney Houston stood in that hallway for another 45 seconds. Joelle said nothing, because some moments require silence the way lungs require air. Then Whitney turned and walked back down the corridor. She did eat. She sat in front of her mirror for a long time, not applying makeup, not rehearsing, just sitting, looking at herself. Not the version the industry had built. The other one, the girl from Newark, New Jersey, who used to sit in the pews at New Hope Baptist Church and feel the music move through her like something alive, something that had no interest in being polished or controlled. Stop protecting yourself. At 9:22 p.m., Whitney Houston walked out onto the stage. The crowd was large and well-dressed and already warm. They applauded with the quality that is really a statement. We know who you are. We expect great things and delivered exactly as expected. It was the sound of 22 million albums. Expectations so enormous it had its own gravity. She stood at the microphone. The band began. The arrangement was immaculate. The lighting was perfect. And then Whitney Houston closed her eyes. Not the practiced professional eye close she used in performances. She closed them the way you close your eyes when you stop performing and start something else entirely. When the first note came out, the sound technician at the mixing board involuntarily took his hands off the faders. Not because anything was wrong, because something was so right that he forgot what he was supposed to be doing. What came out of Whitney Houston that night was not a performance. It was a confession. Every controlled year and every polished interview breaking loose at the same time. Her voice, which had always been technically extraordinary, was suddenly something else. Raw and enormous and ferociously personal. It hit the audience with the force of something they had needed without knowing they needed it. In the wings, Tina Turner stood watching. One of her backup singers whispered, "Oh my God." Tina said nothing. She watched with the expression of someone who has seen a seed grow into something they couldn't have predicted. Three-quarters of the way through the song, Whitney went off script. She held a note 3 counts longer than the arrangement called for, bending it slightly, letting it fracture at the edges in a way no vocal coach would have sanctioned. And in that fractured edge, in that tiny controlled imperfection, the audience heard something true. The glass disappeared. Several people in the first 20 rows, without knowing why, started crying. When she finished, the applause was different. Not louder necessarily, different in quality. The way a room sounds when people aren't applauding to fulfill an expectation, but because something happened to them. Backstage after the show, their paths crossed one final time. Whitney was surrounded by her team, everyone saying it was incredible. Tina was moving toward the exit, already wrapped in a coat. She slowed when she passed Whitney. Their eyes met. Tina said nothing. She simply nodded. Once, slowly. The way you nod when words don't quite exist yet, or when they don't need to. Whitney nodded back. That was all. Two queens, one corridor, and a truth told plainly enough that it changed the shape of things going forward. In the years that followed, people who worked closely with Whitney noted a shift. A new willingness to go places that were less safe, less controlled. She would hold notes until they trembled. She would go somewhere that was hers alone. And when she came back from it, the audience came back with her. A journalist who caught her at Madison Square Garden in 1991 wrote that it felt like watching someone discover the difference between singing a song and meaning it. Tina Turner, asked years later about younger artists she admired, mentioned Whitney Houston. She said only that she had a voice built for truth and that she hoped she had found her way to it. The charity concert raised several $1,000,000 that night. It is remembered, if at all, as a footnote. But for the people who watch Whitney Houston walk to a microphone and make a different kind of decision than the one she'd been making for 3 years, it is remembered as something else entirely. A before and an after. A door opening. Sometimes the most important things that happen in a life happen in a hallway. In 45 seconds. Between two women who barely knew each other and both knew exactly what they were talking about. Sometimes the person who gives you the truth you need most has no reason to be kind to you, except that they remember what it cost them to learn the thing they're giving away for free. Whitney Houston went home that night and slept better than she had in months. Something in what she was carrying had shifted. Some weight had been set down in a backstage corridor in Los Angeles, and the air where it used to be felt clean and possible in hers.